Luke Pearson, an industrial designer and one half of the successful design consultants Pearson Lloyd. He's a man known for his mission to simplify the world, using design as the vehicle to challenge ideas and problems. Who believes a competitive advantage is born from a deep understanding of human behaviour and the way furniture makes people experience a space. Let's meet the man committed to his interrogation of the word why and the co-creation of curious relationships. Let's meet Luke. Welcome to the Design Royalty podcast studio. The way we normally start the podcast is with an icebreaker. So people are interested. They know Luke Pearson and we've read about you in the press and on your website. What might we not know about you that if people hear, they will be, ooh, really?
I can cycle backwards.
You can't.
I can.
Seriously?
Mm-hmm.
How did you do? Are you a circus trainer?
No, just growing up in the middle of nowhere, entertaining myself. So I taught myself to cycle backwards.
That's actually a thing?
It can be.
That's fascinating because life leads clues, and we're going to talk about that. You literally are a person. I had a chance to speak to you before the podcast started. And you are a man that doesn't have a box. You completely think of things upside down and abstract. That is weird, Luke. And also, we've got your beautiful Whippet in the studio today. What's your Whippet called?
Twig.
Twig. Why did you buy a Whippet? He's gorgeous.
Because they don't need a huge amount of exercise. They need a short run and then they'll just sleep all day. So we needed something that was sort of low maintenance and easygoing.
Like you. Okay, so you can cycle backwards. That's fascinating. Why do you do what you do then?
Well, I grew up in a creative family. My dad was a painter, taught painting at college. My mum was a fashion designer and she ran Winchester School of Art fashion course. So in a way, it feels like it was a bit predestined, although looking back on it, they didn't ever push us towards my brother and myself didn't push us towards the creative disciplines. They just sort of let us find our way. I actually thought I was going to be a quantum physicist, but when I got to A-levels, realised I hated maths, and that was not a good idea.
And how did industrial design come about?
Well, I'd always designed and made things, and I'd always drawn. And in a way, at school, my parents had, I really enjoyed my sciences and things. And
is that a prerequisite for your industry, a science-based knowledge?
No, it's not. But I use it continually. I mean, from the earliest age, I would be reading, reports about things that they discovered and new materials and things like that. And I always made things. It was only really when I decided to give up my maths and I thought, actually, I don't really want to go to university. And thought, well, I'm going to tell my parents and they'll be pretty disappointed. And my dad just said, well, why don't you go to Art Foundation for a year, just to work out what you want to do. And the minute I sort of got that seed planted into my head, everything kind of made sense. And it was just very, very odd that even though we'd grown up in a very creative discipline, the thought had never really occurred to me.
That there was an alternative to university?
No, that I should do something creative, which is, looking back, it's bizarre. Because it's, my parents were in their studios all weekend. My brother and myself were entertaining ourselves, either creating things or I was riding backwards. So when I got to foundation, my various tutors all thought I would apply for courses in their discipline, like painting and sculpture.
Is that because you excelled?
I wouldn't say I excelled. I was very enthusiastic. I loved it. And I guess I was confident and capable enough. And then the design tutor, he was a very nice guy. And I said, Mervyn, I just need a bit of advice. I can't really work out what to do. And he just laughed and walked off and said, well, I guess you'll apply to Kingston or Central. You'll do your degree. You might take some time out. Then you'll probably apply to the Royal College. You'll probably work for somebody, and then you'll set up your practice. And he said this walking off down the corridor late one afternoon. And I sort of shouted after him, I'm serious. I need to have a conversation. And he just put his hand in the air as if that's it. That is the conversation. And actually, he was very right.
He was very right. He was serious.
He was serious. I think in hindsight,
a mind reader.
Well, having taught, at a number of colleges and ending up sort of doing 7 years at the Royal College of Art, you can see who's going to sort of achieve what and how they're going to manage it. There are some people that just don't fit in, but they're going to find a way. And there are other people that are going to fit in and be part of the system. So I think that's the beautiful thing about creativity is you can find a niche, you can find a gap for yourself.
That's an interesting one. So you can identify whether people will fit into the system or not. Where do you think you come?
I'm probably relatively unemployable.
So do you fit in or not?
To a degree. Obviously, to a degree, I fit in. Not particularly.
This is why I'm curious about the question, because my instinct is you're pretty unconventional with your thinking. I've spoken to you a little bit before the podcast. We'll talk about that in a moment. Yet you're telling me you're fitting into a system.
Well, I decided to set up a partnership. So that's the first thing I think about fitting in. You have to work with somebody to do that.
Good.
Second thing is people say it must be great doing your own thing and running your own business and not working for anybody. And I say to them, actually, that's the opposite. I work for multiple people, all with different personalities, with different problems in different sectors.
Brilliant.
And it's an absolute nightmare. If you have one boss, all you have to do is work out how to deal with that one boss, that one system, that one organization. So actually, on one level, I think I've made my life very, very complicated. But I also have a propensity to get bored, or rather, maybe a better way of describing that is probably the thing I'm most scared of is being bored. So I have definitely created a scenario where life is stimulating.
You appreciate variety.
Yeah, and challenge. And I appreciate not knowing how to do something and then finding out how to do it and then building a solution. And I also appreciate the process of then looking at that solution and asking myself, well, how could I have done it better? Now, that's actually quite a good sort of process to apply to design, because you have to analyze and you have to improve, and then you have to learn from that to go on to the next project. So in a way, what I do in terms of business is also a design process, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So Tom and yourself created Pearson Lloyd 25 years ago now.
Yeah.
Yeah? What do you think attracted you? What do you think connected you with Tom?
Well, Tom was... I did industrial design for my undergraduate at Central St Martin's. Fantastic course, amazing city to be in. But I felt somewhat dislocated from what the course was teaching. It felt very... it felt superficial. I think in hindsight, slightly with a bit more wisdom, I probably wasn't mature enough to manipulate the course in the right way. So I felt on the surface, it felt a little bit like styling. This was the middle of the 80s. It's when everything was sort of shiny and chrome and matte black. And I guess I was rebelling against that because I felt like it was all very superficial and, there were too many fast-moving consumer goods. It was the boom of the electronic era. And I thought, I don't want to do this because it's all moving too quickly. And I sort of slowly began to gravitate towards an interest in furniture, which also was a bit surprising because my mum had sort of filled the house with extraordinary antiques that she'd found in junk shops over the years. So we had a kind of very sort of boho house, really, and nothing was new. So it took a while for that penny to drop. And I then took a year out, thought, well, I don't really want to be an industrial designer. Went to America for a while. And then kind of started to feel like I did want to do something with design, but I wanted to solve problems with it. I didn't really know what that meant. This is a long answer. I then got back to Britain, was looking through down the King's Road one day and came across a gallery called the Fiel Gallery, Peter Fiel, who wrote a lot of the design books. And in the gallery was a very interesting chair in the window by Konstantin Gricic. And I thought, this is super interesting.
How so?
It was new, it was modern, but it was just built in a very sort of deconstructed way. So it was a very unconventional aesthetic. So I went in, started chatting to Peter, And Peter said, yes, he's just a recent graduate from the Royal College of Art. And funnily enough, another penny dropped, because my dad had taken me to the Royal College of Art degree shows since I was a tiny boy. Never occurred to me to go and do a postgraduate. And at that very moment, I just thought, I've got to go back to college and I've got to do furniture. Why these things hadn't aligned before now, I don't know. So I applied to the Royal College, got in, did furniture, absolutely loved it. Tom, conversely, had been doing furniture at Nottingham, and he'd decided to move away from furniture because he felt like there wasn't enough technology involved in it, that the archetypes were too set. Mm. Interestingly, the fast-moving consumer goods that I was escaping from, the reason why I went to furniture was because the archetype is to a large degree, it's completely fixed. The human body doesn't change. But yet again, we can find a new way of designing a chair for a slightly different purpose, because something in the environment is altered, which changes how you view the archetype. So the function changes, or the material changes, or the way in which we use them, the duration. So we were both, in a way, leaving disciplines for certain reasons, moving towards other ones. Anyway, Tom used to come up and bring a pint of beer with him in the evenings. I always worked late at my workbench, and we sort of formed a slightly curious relationship, because I thought, what's he doing up here, picking my brain? And then we ended up working in studios very near each other. We'd have a pint of beer in the evenings. And as I began to realise I was very unemployable, I sort of chatted to him and said, I'm thinking of setting up on my own, but I actually don't want to do it on my own because I'm interested in working with people. And I was sort of sounding him out and said, you interested? And he was never he's never wanted to be sort of frightened of a challenge. And he said, yeah, I'd do that. And that's how it started.
25 years later, here we are.
Yeah.
Hey there. If you're enjoying this episode and want to hear more exciting and informative chats about design and architecture, then don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you. Anyway, back to the episode.
I've heard you use the word deconstruct when you mentioned about that aha moment you had on the King's Road. And I'm interested in your unique, for you, your design process. When I met you this morning outside the podcast, you commented on my bag and explained to me that actually the mechanism of closing and opening, it actually probably wasn't the most... What did you say? It wasn't the most...
Natural.
And I'd never thought about that, because instinctively it's just something that I do over and over again, and it's also almost been force-fed. And I understand, word on the street with you, is that you are unconventional in your thinking. For you, you will deconstruct ideas and then create something completely unique and new. Can you give us an example?
Well, I guess... It's a difficult one to answer and pick a project, because sometimes there are tiny details in a project which are very hard.
Airbags on Virgin.
Right. Well,
genius.
Well, that was a project where we didn't have a solution to a particular problem. So
what comes first?
Sometimes the problem forces a creative outcome. Sometimes you have an idea and then it gives you or rather you have a sort of an associated idea, and then it prompts you to look at a problem differently, and you can reappraise the problem and reinterpret it. So it's a bit of chicken and egg.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to solve the problem. Sometimes you cross-pollinate with ideas, and the cross-pollination sort of creates a new being, if that makes sense. So with Virgin, it was the challenge was we had a new layout where people were flying diagonally. And it meant that with the safety testing, you had to use a 3-point harness to stop them sort of crashing into the side of the seat if the aircraft was to come to an abrupt halt. And so the idea was to use an airbag, which up until that point hadn't been done before.
So in that situation with Virgin, somebody would come to you with a problem that they needed solving?
Well, that was a very interesting project, because I think what we really love is co-creation, where we're actually collaborating with people who are experts or have a skill that we don't have, and then we can draw on it. And with Virgin, they had a nascent idea about sleeping on the back of the seat, basically. And most airline seats, up to that point, you were just going to recline and you sleep on the seating surface. But the ergonomics for sitting are not the same as the ergonomics for sleeping. So it had this rather interesting idea, and they got us in very early and said, we'd like you to help make us make this work. One of the problems we had was that in order for them to get the right head count in, they had to fly diagonally. Now, we could have used a 3-point harness, it would have been fine, but I still remember in one of the meetings we said, why don't we see if we can use an airbag? Because they'd just started being used in cars. So this was an example, as we were discussing this morning, of actually, if you look at the industry you're in their industry, it was all about restraining the passenger. So add another strap, stop them moving. But if you look in the car industry, we know that if you restrain them with a strap, you break your neck. So they'd invented the airbags to cushion the blow. So it was really just cross-pollinating. It's taking an idea from one area that you wouldn't typically get exposed to in another area and getting them to collide. So I think as a designer, actually what you're trying to do, I think, is trying to promote collision. And actually we've just been giving the last 2 or 3 years, and when we went online, lots of people asked us to talk about things. And one of the ideas we had was this idea of collision and mutation.
Promote collision. Talk more about that.
Well, if you, for example, my kids will quite often be a bit alarmed. I'll spring up a conversation with somebody. I have no idea what they're about or who they are. But there might just be something about what they did or something, and I'll start a chat. The fact that I know nothing about them means there's going to be something unexpected comes out of that conversation.
Very good.
So that alone can change or reshape my day. You know, if I approach somebody with a fixed perspective, I probably get back exactly what I'm reflecting onto them. So it's all about trying to test the parameters and challenge what you think you know and discover what you don't know. And then if you can discover what you don't know, you can reframe your perspective on things. And that really is the key to the creative process, because if you do everything that you know, probably by definition it's not creative.
Absolutely. And which was something which brings me perfectly onto my next question. How do you know what you don't know? So when you're being called into a brief situation and a client is asking you to almost future-proof something, to create something that even they might not know that they need, how do your designers and you and Tom, how do you create what you don't know? What are you drawing on?
It's a very, very difficult process to generate, because sometimes the act of trying to generate, you're actually still somehow producing something you know. You're generating a process that you're sort of springing off trampolines that you know that are there in a way.
And what are the trampolines?
Well, they're invariably things that you know. So what I think the key is kind of trying to build enough looseness in the process, and you're sort of clutching at things, you're clutching at air, hoping to give form to it, hoping to give shape to it. I mean, a good example of that, a few years ago, we got approached by the Department of Health and the Design Council to do a number of projects. And
Great client.
Very interesting, and real problems to solve, unlike marketing problems, which actually aren't real problems. They're just desires, they're ambition. I want to sell more. Whereas the Department of Health, they have real problems. You know, it's about saving lives and doing so in the most efficient manner possible. So we did 3 projects for them, and one of them, which was probably the most surprising, was to reduce violence and aggression in A&E departments. And we've unfortunately probably all been in there. They're horrible. You've got people who are mentally unwell. You've got people who are drunk. You've got people who are angry. You've got people who are terrified. And you've got, so if you top and tail it between old people that might have dementia and are confused and have fallen over, and young parents who've got this baby that swallowed a grape,
Terrifying.
It's you're putting in all these people which are sort of bound to either scare each other or promote problems. And then in a wonderful city like London, you've got diversity in terms of language and culture, which adds another dimension to things. So I think when we were commissioned, they thought, Pearson Lloyd will probably design some very nice furniture which is comfortable and calms people down, and maybe some screening and some sort of safety devices that will keep people apart. And I guess in hindsight, we probably thought the same. But we thought, well, let's look at this, because actually, why is violence happening here? Everybody's damaged and injured, and they've gone to this extraordinary place for help, and yet the calmest people are sort of turned into animals. What's happening here? So we went through an incredible process of consultation with the doctors, the nurses, the security guards, the people on the triage desks, and trying to understand from their perspective what was going on, but also interviewing patients to understand what was going on for them.
It's very much a collaboration.
It was very much a collaboration,
and a collision.
And it was, and also what we were effectively doing is, we thought the problem was it was an uncomfortable situation, and because you were injured, you were bad-tempered, simplistically, or because people were drunk, they were bad-tempered. But actually what we were finding is a lot of the aggression and the, let's say, the bad situations were also promoted by the staff. And what we found was actually the staff were frustrated. They were saying the same thing again and again and again. They were incredibly tired. They were also, even though they were trained to deal with somebody whose bone was sticking out of their shin, they're still having to deal with the trauma, the psychological trauma of that person who's never had a bone sticking out of their shin before. So what we found was that it was as traumatic, but for different reasons, for the staff, and as difficult to enter into a sort of process of dialogue and education for the patients, as it was the patients to understand what the hell was happening. And you go in and maybe your bone is sticking out, but if it's not bleeding and it's not a major bone, that might not be as serious as somebody's that's got a stroke and needs to be cooled down very quickly. So why have I been put back? Why has that person gone in before me? So what we realised was that the biggest issue was nobody knew what was happening.
Communication.
And it was communication. So we built this map that was really about this process of communication. What happens in the journey from I arrive to the moment I go home?
Which makes us feel safe. When we know what's going on, we feel safer, and consumers like certainty. Yes,
exactly. I mean, if you think about your children, the thing that's most disturbing for a child is, I don't know what's going to happen. So those reassuring words from the parent, this is going to happen. And you're not always giving them good news, but you're telling them what's going to happen, which then allows them to frame the situation. So we built a map, and we thought, it can't be that simple. It's a piece of graphics. And we tested it, and the results were extraordinary. So they did a number of trials. There were a reduced number of illness days taken by staff because they were less stressed. There were less physical interactions because people could navigate their way around them before they happened. It was more efficient because there was more information, which means staff were getting asked less.
Makes us feel more in control as well.
Exactly.
As opposed to at the mercy of somebody else.
Yeah. So it meant that, you didn't have to ask the question. I mean, it was just incredibly simple. It doesn't solve all the problems, but I think we had some crazy statistic, like for every £1 spent, £3 was saved.
Wonderful.
So, that's one of those projects, I can't remember what the question was, but that's one of those projects where you're getting a completely surprising answer by asking questions differently.
Disrupting.
Have you read this month's issue of Designer magazine yet? Available in digital and print editions, Designer magazine keeps you updated on the world of design and architecture. Get your free trade subscription today at designerarty.co.uk.
Is there ever a client that's come to you with a request, a need, and you would happily turn down the project?
Yes, we've turned down projects before. I mean, mostly these days we turn down projects if we feel we don't agree with the ethics of them, or we feel like we've done it before and they're really just asking us to do a Me Too project. If we feel like they've got an ambition for change and progress, we'll do it.
And this is linked to my next question, because I see at the core of when you speak, your focus is always on change, improvement, upgrading, and things need to make sense.
Yes, I think on a sort of rather simplistic level, we're very traditional industrial designers. We kind of believe that industrial design is there to improve the world.
Good. You wouldn't just your point is not to do something for no point.
Well, that is a difficult question to answer completely truthfully, because there are lots of projects that we've done that we wish we hadn't done, given the changes and our understanding of climate change. You know, the fact is we're industrial designers, which means we're involved in industry every single day of the week. And there are certain industries which we wouldn't want to be involved with again. But I could also say that those projects, we built things that were more efficient, smarter, use less materials. So I don't think we've ever done a project, well, at least for 20 years, we haven't done a project where we haven't considered the longevity, the build, shipping, transport. And it's a very, very difficult conversation to come out of with a black and white answer. Because, for example, if you put in materials that aren't great, but the product lasts 3 times as long, that might be way less damaging than a short life product which has sustainable materials, simply because you might be involved with more shipping. Mm. So you have to balance up so many different topics now if we're really thinking about what sustainable solutions really mean.
But it's an interesting conversation, because for me, I sense with post-COVID, the balance of power, the relationship between the supplier, the industrial designer, and the client, the shift has almost changed, in the sense that the designers are commanding more power. Actually, we work with a code of ethics now. We work on projects that align with our values. And I know one of your values is sustainability. That's something we spoke about this morning when we were talking about air miles. You know, you're reluctant sometimes to get on a plane if it doesn't make sense to you as part of the whole programme.
Yes. I mean, it sounds crazy now looking back, but probably for 20 years we were flying every 10 days. And actually, about a year before COVID, we started doing Skype calls with people. Clunky.
Progressive.
Yes. I mean, really, it was just for speed. You know, we were busy. They weren't very good. We didn't know how to present and all those things. But now, you know, we've all had 2.5 years of, you know, COVID-related delays, and we've got great work tools. And I think it's also changed people's culture. You know, it's clearly valuable meeting face to face. You know, if we were doing this online, we wouldn't have the same sort of interaction. Mm. So things happen, but we've got to balance that around efficiencies and understanding what the impacts are.
And with sustainability at the forefront of our conversation, is there an aspect of it that you're excited about, or that you're fully able to integrate within your practice?
Yes, many. I think it ranges from the culture of marketing.
How so?
Well, if you think about the sort of supply chain and how you get a product to an end user, I will shop carefully online. I don't ever return anything. People do because they're lazy and they can try 5 bits of clothing and send them back. So I think we're in an early stage where we're trying to work out what are the good things and the bad things. But for me, if I'm buying something online and I know it's come in a truck with 25 other things to my local neighbourhood, and I haven't got on the tube or haven't driven into town to go shopping, that must be better. So we've got things that are changing at the moment. So, you know, that then raises the question of retail. Do you actually need as many sort of retail emporiums to sell product? You don't. You probably need enough so that people can get the face-to-face, try things on. So we're seeing models changing. So we're seeing retail models changing, communication sort of platforms change to give the end consumer better information to make better decisions. With that comes transparency, because, okay, I've got this information online. How much CO2e is involved in that making of that product? How much carbon? What happens to that product at the end of the life? Does this company have a policy for using the waste material, et cetera, et cetera? Now, before you'd go to a shop and you'd try it on, you'd leave. But we have a sort of never-ending sort of pot of information if we choose to look for it. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got huge amounts of information. So we now know that plywood, for example, is not a circular material. It's grown. We can use glues that are non-damaging to the environment. But at the end of the life of the product, what can you do with plywood? Not a lot. Whereas with plastic, we're all demonizing plastic because we can see it in the oceans. But if you're using it for long life product, you can melt it down and make another product. So 5 kilograms of oil, let's say, make a few kilograms of plastic goods. But those goods could be in circulation for 100 years. If we put that oil in our car and we drive to Sainsbury's, it's gone. So I think your question was, where can we make those changes? I think absolutely everywhere. And as a designer, we can expose that from transport, shipping, marketing. Do we need to go to huge exhibitions like the Milan Saloni if all that information's online? Probably not every year. How do we get there? On the train? Do we fly? So I think all those things as a designer factor into our conversations about marketing and consumption, but also obviously design. We've got huge amounts of information at our fingertips. I think the problem we have as designers, we tend to be promoting those conversations more than our clients at the moment, because the clients don't have enough legislation to force that upon them, and the consumer is just bombarded with too much to know. So we have to pick away at it kind of everywhere. We have to make sure that legislation forces the manufacturers to expose the right level of information for the client, so the end user can actually get something consumable and bite-sized, something tangible. And we also need to put things in play that are long-term, not short-term. So it's a huge conversation that we're entering into, but it's very exciting.
And there are also people like you and Tom, I'm assuming, who have ethics, a code of ethics at the core of their values. They want the planet to live on, and it's not all about dollars and pounds.
Well, yes, and also just in terms of loads of people who are probably feeling rather dark and gloomy, there's going to be a lot of business to be made by saving the planet. So, there are a lot of businesses that are going to have to completely reshape themselves, and actually they may not be sustainable businesses, but there'll be as many businesses to create to save the planet. So I actually think, and I've got 2 kids, and I have to paint that picture for them. The world will shift, and if we're smart, we can shift fast enough that we don't damage it more. And it could be a thrilling journey of exploration and discovery and creation. It doesn't mean that everything would change for the negative.
I think that
on
thinking.
the opposite.
I like that. There is a lot of information out there around sustainability, and I'm wondering if you're happy to share any resources that you particularly rely on and trust.
Well, I think the big issue is that we don't have enough sources that we can reliably trust. There aren't enough bodies that have clear, simple, well sort of structured information. I always think of things in terms of a pyramid. I want to get to the point on the top. If there are 10,000 blocks in the middle at the bottom of that pyramid, I'm never going to see them. You need to know you can see the top. And then you need to be able to sort of chunk down. And I think the problem is it's so big. So everybody needs to be picking away at it. The end consumer needs to inform themselves. But they need to be able to structure the argument and realize that, yes, buying bottled water is really bad because we're going to throw away the plastic bottle. But driving your car, you're using way more oil than buying the plastic bottle. So we have to really think about those things, and if you buy a new car, the chances are you've got to drive 60,000 miles more before the saving on the new technology will offset the old car. So the difficulty that we have is that it's very easy to just say, it's too complicated. But you've got to pick away at things. Ultimately, I really believe that it has to be government directed. We have to create good legislation, good structure, that we can't force all the responsibility on the consumer to educate themselves. We have to build it in. We have to build it into the schools as well. We should be educating our children from day one about consumption, about the culture of acquisition.
Agreed. What would be, final question, what would be your dream project if you could pick any client, any product to reconceptualise, any sector of the industry?
It would probably be something transport related, because I think our biggest problem is that we're not local. Nothing is local. If we were local, if we grew our food locally, if we created out of the local resource, in other words, we have sandstone, we build out of sandstone. We have clay from the local river, we build out of clay. We have wood from the local forest, we build out of wood. We've gone so far away from that business model. So if we are going to transport materials and people around the world, because that's the system that we now have, then transportation has to be the key in terms of building an efficient world.
What a lovely point to leave this conversation on.
That made sense.
You are amazing. Thank you for your wisdom.
Thank you very much.
If you have enjoyed today's podcast, please like and subscribe. And I'm going to be here every Monday with more exciting, amazing guests. See you then.